Hey, so quick heads up, there's going to be a spoiler warning in this video essay on Poor Things. In fact, in this video, I dive into some of the thematic storytelling present in Poor Things, and that means divulging a few events from this movie. So if you have not watched Poor Things yet and wish to remain unspoiled, I recommend skipping this video for now. You can always come back to it when you're ready, I promise. Poor Things is opposite Frankenstein. This Yorgo Lanthimos-directed film, based on the 1992 book of the same name by Alasdair Gray, is essentially by narrative design the inverse of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or otherwise called the modern Prometheus. In that book, and its film adaptations, though for the purpose of this essay, we are mostly referring to the 1818 source material, because there be some key differences between the source material and the movies. And in regards to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, I'm pulling from various synopses online, because it has been a while since I read that said source material. The scientist Frankenstein tooled and toiled in experimentations that went against the natural order, as if it were an evil queen vanquishing a Disney princess or the St. Louis Cardinals. No additive adjectives here, just the St. Louis Cardinals. I hate them. But in terms of Frankenstein, that story is about how a scientist named Frankenstein, because title, sews the body parts of various dead people back together, as well as animal parts and other things. God forbid what present this man gives his father on Father's Day, and harnesses the power of science to create a new life within that hodgepodge of different body parts that acts as a vessel for a new living being's soul. And admittedly, this concept has many parallels with Poor Things. After all, in the recent movie, the scientist Godwin Baxter, really well played by Willem Dafoe, engages in mad acts of science, as well as one of the cleverest fart jokes ever put onto film. Because place that as a box quote on the Blu-ray release, please. I dare you. But still, Godwin's biggest character attribute is his scientific prowess, and in Poor Things, Godwin's most notable creation is Bella Baxter, played by Emma Stone, who was scientifically conceived when Godwin inserted a baby fetus's brain into the body of her deceased mother. Which, wholesome. I mean, it's weird, it's macabre, but it's kind of wholesome in a very up way. Just saying that as an expert on the matter. But anyway, the point. Poor Things and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein have a similar layout in its story about how a brilliant scientist created a new life, or in Poor Things' case, transferred life through scientific means through the art of experimentation. Sure, there are some clear differences. In fact, there are many differences, which we will get to shortly, but at their base level, Poor Things and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein share a commonality here. But other than that similarity, these two stories drastically diverge despite having a concept in common, with a lot of their divergences starting with tone and genre. See, Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, no relation, is a gothic narrative that lent itself well to horror movie adaptations, whereas Poor Things is a comedy with many dramatic elements, i.e. they are tonally different genres despite a similar idea at heart. And much of these variations within their respective narrative approaches are in how these stories portray science. In fact, in Frankenstein, science is portrayed as dangerous. After all, the other title to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is the modern Prometheus, which that word Prometheus is a reference to the Greek mythological deity who gave fire to humanity against Zeus's wishes, and was then punished for an eternity. Also, Prometheus is the name of a great Septic Flesh song, but that's not important to anyone except me, because I care. And for that, the Prometheus in the title is essentially a reference to the main character of Frankenstein doing something that was forbidden, which in the story, that would be Frankenstein's application of science to create something that is unnatural, which is Frankenstein's monster, or the creature rather. And upon the creation of the creature, Frankenstein realizes that he applied science in a way that ventured too far, embodying a famous quote from a certain dinosaur movie. Maybe you've heard of it. And for that, Frankenstein is filled with regret. Despite the monster's keen intellect and high intelligence, which is different from a lot of the famous movies, the life that Frankenstein had created was physically hideous to his eyes and had bad connotations in terms of what the monster represented. The idea that his scientific mind went too far, going against nature and human values, which is admittedly an energy that I proudly resemble. Because like Prometheus, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein frames its titular character as having crossed a moral and scientific line. Poor Things is the opposite of this. Unlike Frankenstein, this film finds beauty in science. In fact, Godwin in his curiosity towards quirky scientific experiments isn't presented as being villainous. Maybe an oddity, sure, but definitely not antagonistic. After all, Godwin is often referred to as just being God, and that's portrayed as charming rather than sinister. Maybe a bit of an ego trip, sure, but one that's justified, because truly Godwin is just a man that's proud to push scientific boundaries, culminating in his biggest experiment with Bella Baxter, a baby-brained girl in the body of an adult woman who slowly but surely learns about the world around her. A girl that Godwin also slowly but surely starts to feel paternal feelings towards, because despite how he tries to be emotionally distant towards her, he just can't help but care for Bella. And given everything, can you really blame him? She's the soul of a baby in an adult body trying to figure out how to live life. She's trying to discover how life do. If anything, she's excited by every form of discovery she makes and doesn't fully understand how her actions, often ridiculous, are received by other people. What's there not to love? And that's just something, the human love connection, that Frankenstein didn't share with his monster in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's a key difference. Another key difference is the reasons why Frankenstein eventually wants to destroy the creature, phrasing, by the last third of Mary Shelley's novel, as well as why Godwin wants Bella to remain inside his estate at the beginning of Poor Things. Because despite how, in Frankenstein, the creature has his own wants and desires, Frankenstein, by the end of the book, views his creation as, well, a monster, and wants to eventually destroy him due to being a danger to society. After all, the creature commits various murders throughout the book. He is a threat, a menace on par with 1,000 Spider-Men. Yet it must be said that the creature is portrayed as being very sympathetic. Throughout the story, he routinely experiences personal hardship due to his appearance and desires to have a personal sense of fulfillment and purpose, a way to be happy, a happiness that Frankenstein routinely denies. Because whether it comes to originally fleeing the creature out of fear, denying the creature's desire for a scientifically created female companion, a bride of Frankenstein, if you will, or the fact that Frankenstein eventually feels that it is his right to be able to destroy the creature, Frankenstein always believes that he has a certain ownership over his creation. He just doesn't respect the creature as a valid being with his own wants and needs. Whereas in the first third of Poor Things, Godwin wants to keep Bella in the house, which he does for two reasons. Firstly, he wants to keep an eye on his experiment, and secondly, because he develops strong paternal instincts over her, and thus he is afraid of letting her go, and for the fact that he fears that she won't survive outside the confines of his estate in her current lack of maturation, even if she is learning socially acceptable behaviors and various forms of education at a rapid-fire pace. Even though Bella expresses a desire to see the world, Godwin fears that the world would tear her apart like an aging pop star from the 90s, because Slipknot was right. People do equal shit, meaning that Godwin wants to control Bella for fears of her own safety and his own paternal feelings, whereas in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the titular character desires to kill the creature for the sake of society's safety, which is a big difference between the two. Because obviously. The stories of both Poor Things and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein also grapple with ideas of autonomy very differently. In fact, the characters of Frankenstein and Godwin believe that they own and have the right to make choices for their quote-unquote creations, despite how those said creations are intelligent beings, or at least becoming intelligent beings in Bella's case. That even though Bella and the creature were given life through the means of science, they desire to have control over their lives and see what the world has to offer, and all its shiny, shimmering splendor. And for that, the creature and Bella take control of their lives and eventually leave, but do so in different ways. In terms of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the creature escapes from Frankenstein's lab, where Frankenstein had originally abandoned him out of fear and disgust upon his creation, whereas in Poor Things, Bella departs from Godwin's estate by convincing Godwin with an argument. In other words, Frankenstein didn't respect the creature's personhood because he abandoned him as if he were a monster. But Godwin did respect Bella's, or at least to a certain extent. After all, Godwin grapples between paternal feelings for Bella and for the fact that she is an experiment, as well as the fact that he plans to one day marry her off to his assistant, Max McCandless, which, is not autonomous respect, because, arranged marriages suck, yet Godwin throws those feelings of viewing Bella as a science project and that earlier mentioned potential arranged marriage up in the air because of emotional sentiment towards her, which I understand. I cried for 2 hours while petting a dog today. I hate doing my taxes. And for that, Godwin lets Bella go on her adventure, whereas Frankenstein originally abandoned his creation, then comes to fear him over the course of the narrative. He was afraid of what trouble the creature would stir with his own autonomy. And while yes, Frankenstein had good reason to eventually fear the creature murders members of his family and his loved ones after all, that doesn't change the fact that Frankenstein didn't love and respect his creation from the start. If anything, Frankenstein always feared him and viewed him as less of a person even before the rampage. Frankenstein just always believes that he has a certain ownership over the creature, which is just so different from the respect and love that Godwin feels towards Bella in Poor Things, meaning that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Poor Things' portrayal of autonomy, as represented by those scientifically created characters, are opposite. Admittedly though, there were some other differences between these two situations. See, where Frankenstein wanted to restrict the creature's freedom since its inception, whether that means originally abandoning the creature, denying the creature's demands to create a female creature so the monster could be happy, or eventually desiring to kill the creature, Godwin only restricts Bella's freedom at the beginning of the movie before being convinced to allow her to leave. Unlike Frankenstein, Bella doesn't have to deal with her creator's control for very long in the story. But with that being said, Bella still has to deal with some form of social restraint throughout Poor Things' story, mostly because she is a woman, a second-class citizen within our patriarchal world, as well as in Poor Things' steampunk patriarchal world, because even in a world full of scientific oddities, discrimination against women remains a constant. What a wonderful world. And for Bella, these restrictions come in various forms, mostly in the form of men who want to control her, the most notable of these men being Mark Ruffalo's Duncan Wedderburn, a man who is essentially Bella's travel companion and chaperone, a man who is kind of an asshole, a man that critiques, corrects, and downright tries to control Bella when out in public, viewing himself as her gendered superior. If anything, Duncan is the type of man that would mansplain to Bella how Frankenstein is actually the name of the scientist and not the monster himself, even though he really shouldn't correct her, because if you are someone that still does this in 2024, then congratulations, no one f***ing likes you, because Duncan, more like Dun can go himself. And while sure, Bella's mind is more innocent towards the beginning of her and Duncan's adventure, and thus some control of Duncan's part is admittedly understandable, because you know, when Bella says, "I'm gonna go punch that baby," and stands up to walk over and attempt to punch that said baby, an action that is generally frowned upon, unless the baby that she was gonna punch would have been baby Hitler, Duncan doesn't act as Bella's authority out of the kindness of his heart. No, the reason why Duncan wants Bella to be his travel companion is simple. He wants sex. He desires epic nookie. He wants that rock and roll coochie coo. And for Bella Baxter, throughout the story, as her baby brain becomes accustomed to being an adult and thus becoming smarter, Bella eventually goes against him and tries to take control of her own life without Duncan and other men dictating what she can and can't do. Bella aims for autonomy. And autonomy is a big deal in Poor Things' story. In fact, Bella wants to live for herself and go on her own grand adventure without Duncan acting as a spoiler sport. Something that happens more often as the movie progresses, when Bella becomes more and more self-aware, intelligent, and knowledgeable, even despite how Duncan increasingly tries to prevent her from becoming her own woman. Because while yes, Bella very much so enjoys having monster sex with Duncan, because wow, her horny levels are off the Richter scale, Bella increasingly finds him to be just the worst. And after certain misfortunes that see Bella and Duncan financially broke to the point that Bella begins to sell her body in exchange for sexual pleasure, Duncan views Bella as less than human, maybe even a downright monster, a creature if you will. And that's very much in line with how Frankenstein viewed his monster, phrasing a demon who very much tormented him, similar to how Duncan believes Bella torments him. There's just a certain similarity there. But with that said, there is a big difference between that said similarity, mostly because narrative-wise, Frankenstein has a decent reason for fearing the creature, at least later on in the story, because throughout the course of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the creature killed members of Frankenstein's family and his loved ones, which are some pretty big red flags. But in Poor Things, Duncan's reasons for fearing Bella are for dumb reasons, because while yes, Bella did give away Duncan's money for altruistic purposes, she thought she was donating it to people in need after all. It is very telling that the straw that broke the camel's back in Duncan's and Bella's relationship was the fact that Bella had sex with another man in exchange for some cash. In other words, Duncan was repulsed by the fact that Bella chose to engage in the act of prostitution, even if it financially benefited both of them. He viewed the fact that she had personal autonomy, making the decision to go into sex work as something inherently monstrous, because wow, does sex work have a stigma, because despite not hurting anyone, like how Frankenstein's monster did, Duncan fears and detests Bella for having her own agency in this matter, her own autonomy. Bella and the monster further deviate from each other in terms of their eventual views of the world. In fact, the two have their own experiences and see the world's good and bad qualities, and overall come to polarly opposing conclusions. In terms of Frankenstein's monster, no relation, the creature initially sees some kindness in humanity and even befriends a blind human before he is eventually shunned for his physical appearance, causing him to hate humanity and life itself. And in terms of Bella in Poor Things, she sees the flaws in gender roles, societal rules, and economic classes. Over the course of the movie, she witnesses and even experiences various hardships that she or other people must face. Yet, even despite these undeniable depressing factoids being pervasive in her world, Bella eventually believes that life is beautiful, that its joys are better than its various miseries, which admittedly is helped by the fact that unlike Frankenstein's monster, Bella Baxter looks like Emma Stone, because if I looked like Emma Stone, I'd feel pretty f***ing good about myself too. But still, that doesn't undermine Poor Things' salient thematic point, that life can be wonderful even though it can be unfair and difficult, which, as stated earlier, is very much morally opposed to the creature's more nihilistic viewpoint in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, because in that story, the creature views life's pain as being overwhelming to the point of hating humanity as a whole. It is just a belief that is morally opposed to Bella's more optimistic perspective. Of course, the creature didn't want to be miserable on par with a Chicago Bears fan, though hopefully for Chicago that misery will end soon, because Caleb Williams may as well be the prophesized chosen one for this perpetually sad fan base, just saying. But anyway, the point. The creature desires to find reasons to live. If anything, he believes that he has a right to deserve happiness. But through his lived experience, humanity's general disgust by his appearance, and the fact that Frankenstein was eventually unwilling to create a female creation adjacent to the creature turned hateful and spiteful towards his creator that had repeatedly abandoned him. In fact, the creature routinely saw the worst in humanity. He was tossed aside by Frankenstein as if he were trash or Rob Schneider's stand-up routine. He was feared and hated by supposedly good people, and he ultimately became the monster that the world feared him to be. If anything, he is just filled with sadness, anger, and pain, to the point that at the end of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the creature expresses a desire to die, because even though he was given the gift of life, he has only experienced the worst parts of being alive, overall becoming a tragic character, and even, as stated earlier in this essay, quite sympathetic. Sure, him committing murder is nothing to scoff at, it's murder, but when I first read the book about 11 or 12 years ago, I remember pitying the creature. Like, I felt bad, more than I usually do, which is a lot. I mean, come on, his life was over from the start. He never really experienced joy or love. And for that, it's very much worth noting that this is not the fault of science. While sure the story frames science as being potentially dangerous, I feel like Frankenstein's actions after the creation of the creature bear some responsibility here. Because honestly, Frankenstein never really treated the creature with the kindness or personal respect that the creature deserved. If anything, the creature never had a chance at a good life, eventually just becoming a dangerous threat instead, all because Frankenstein abandoned his responsibility as his creator. And that's just the opposite of what happens to Bella in Poor Things. As stated earlier, Bella Baxter, no relation, was shown kindness, love, and a sense of responsibility from her creator Godwin very early on in her life. A kindness and sense of responsibility that Bella took with her on her journey throughout the movie. Because even despite the literal growing pains that she experiences, Bella always looks at life through a joyful lens, with an energy that is infectious and beautiful, like COVID-19 wearing a cocktail dress. Don't think about this. If anything, she embodies this charming worldview, even when she has to confront the sins and irresponsible nature of the woman who owned the body that she now inhabits. Even when this world tries to restrict her life due to how Bella is labeled as a woman, much like in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, how the world restricted the creature's freedom due to how they labeled him as a monster. Meaning that even despite her trials and tribulations, Bella is her own person with her own hopes and dreams. Hopes and dreams inspired by the love of her paternal figure Godwin. Hell, Godwin left such a good impression on Bella that she wants to learn how to do a science too. If anything, Bella wants to embark on a similar career path as her father. Thus, she has constructive, productive, and healthy ambitions, very much unlike the creature, because Bella was shown kindness and was thus kind in turn, whereas the creature was shown hatred and thus hated in turn. The two characters just had different upbringings, which has resulted in them having very opposing viewpoints on the opposite ends of the moral spectrum. To conclude, Poor Things is indeed oppo hero, Frankenstein. With Mary Shelley's book, there was a thematic fear of advancement of sciences that go too far, and that Frankenstein's creature eventually realized that he hates humanity in life itself. A thematic through line that is opposite of Poor Things, given that Poor Things shows how science can create something beautiful, and that Bella Baxter, despite her personal struggles, views life and taking control of her own body and personage as being a beauty in and of itself. And I feel like Poor Things' story and Bella's character development is very relevant in our modern era. In some sectors of the public, there's a certain fear of science or even knowledge in general. There are attempts to restrict the autonomy of women and others. There are clear injustices in our world, ranging from the discrimination of marginalized identities, human rights being stripped away, severe economic inequality, and such. Things that can make anyone be nearly nihilistic when taking all that pain together. But Bella and Poor Things as a whole, by extension, prove that even with all of its bullshit, life is great and worth living, and science doesn't have to necessarily be inherently villainous. That people deserve autonomy. That people should be treated with kindness, love, and respect. That science doesn't have to be inherently villainous. It's just a film that proudly believes that striving for a better life, learning more about the world, and feeling personally liberated is worth living for, and does so in a way all while showcasing that science can enrich our lives rather than be the equivalent of the mythological Prometheus, truly proving that Poor Things is Frankenstein's opposite.